Hi, I'm Tyler Van Haren. I'm a software engineer here at Statsig, and today we're going to be talking about providing information about the user when you're initializing your SDK, particularly for client SDKs, in this case, the React. And so last video, we chatted about the sort of most basic way to initialize the SDK. We did not provide any user information, so all we could really do are these like pure on-off switches, right? In this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit more about how to provide more context about the user, make use of that for targeting and things like that, and then sort of that transitions us into how you can actually go and run experiments. So one thing you maybe notice in our docs is that in our initial initialization, there's actually the option to provide this user object. This is where you can give us all of the context you have about the user. There's a few things that we will pick up sort of automatically for you. We can actually see some of those if we look at the diagnostic events that got fired last time. In particular, there's a stable ID. You can think of that sort of as like a device identifier that our client SDKs will generate, keep in local storage, and just have as something for you to target off of. So I could actually roll a feature out to 50% of devices. But a lot of times that's not quite what you're looking for if you have a project where people sign in and they want to actually be able to have the same account on different things, have different, have the same experience across different devices. The other things that will sort of be auto-generated by default are things like country, are things like operating system, things where like our client SDKs can sort of pick that up from the user agent itself. That's what allows us to do some of those like basic things for free. So in fact, I could actually go and add some rule here that would do something like, hey, I only want to release this feature in the US. Only US users should be allowed to use my little counter increment here. So there's all those features that will sort of auto-infer, including sort of that like stable ID that will auto-generate just to represent the device. The other thing that we can add in here is when we're initializing the SDK, we can go ahead and actually pass in a user object. What this is, again, is really just sort of a blob of information you want us to have about the user. So some of that is going to be things like, a user ID is a really common one. So again, if I have a signed in user, I might just sort of put the user ID that I have in there, whether that's their email or you generate some identifier for them. As long as you can sort of consistently provide that across different applications, now you can have people have the same experience on different devices. You can also override some of our top-level fields. So if you have your own way to determine what country a user is associated with, you can absolutely do that override as well in that same spot. And then there's also this neat section called custom. And in custom, you can put sort of any other information you want about the user, whether that's something like, are they a subscriber? I can add that information here as well. And say like, yes, this is a subscriber, so maybe they get access to some subscriber-only features. Other information that people find useful to put there tends to be things like account age, super useful for doing like new user targeting, things like that. Those are the types of things, but really if there's something where you're like, I wish I could give this feature to only people who meet these criteria, you can kind of provide that criteria in custom and make use of it. The final thing I'll call out here in the user object is actually custom IDs. When you are doing actions on your site, you can think of yourself as like having multiple identifiers corresponding to yourself. A good example is when I am actually in Statsig itself. I am clicking around. I am on a device. I'm on my laptop right here in this Chrome browser. So that is sort of where my stable ID is coming from. I'm also logged into Statsig as myself, as Tyler Van Haren. And then furthermore, I'm actually in a project. I'm in this Demo project. And so when Statsig is thinking about releasing features, we actually get to like choose sort of which of those identifiers we're going to use to release features and also then to analyze on correspondingly. So if I'm running some logged out test, I'm probably going to use stable ID, and just your device will be your identifier. If I have some logged in feature, I want to have it be consistent across experiences. I'll go ahead and use user ID. Then when I log in, I will always have the same experience. And then a lot of times for Statsig, it makes a lot of sense for us to release features based on project ID or the sort of company, so that when you look at your neighbor's screen, you're seeing the same things. So I could go ahead and add, for instance, project ID here, and say, yeah, that's my project ID. Now I can actually run tests on project ID as well. So that's the sort of information you can put in the user object, as well as what will sort of auto-infer for client SDKs. Let's talk about how to make use of some of that. What it looks like is for those custom fields, there is a criteria here you can choose called custom field. And then you can actually choose like which of those keys you want to take advantage of. So I could add some like subscriber, and only actual subscribers get to pass. Maybe subscriber early access. And so I would have something like this, where now those users would have access to my feature, even if maybe it's not rolled out to everyone yet. So if I save that, and I, again, just because I'm sort of manually setting these values, I'm just going to restart things here. Now, because I am a subscriber, when I look at this, I will actually see that counter, because, again, we actually just have that getting used here. We're just checking that gate, seeing if they should have access to the counter. And now, if I were to initialize without being a subscriber, and then I think the hot refresh should, yep. So now that I'm not a subscriber, I don't have access to that feature anymore because we set it up that way and checked it in code. And so the other thing that we can start to do now that we're passing in user ID and we also have access to the stable ID is we can start doing like percentage rollouts. Rather than using this as purely an on-off switch, I actually get to do things like say, hey, 50% of users are going to get this feature, whether that's for, maybe I just want to slowly release something, make sure I don't get bug reports, or maybe it's actually want to run some experiments and see that my metrics don't regress. And so you'll specify which ID type you're using for a given gate or experiment. It will be sort of set in stone for that experiment or that gate. You can change it to a different one, but it has one ID type. You're releasing it to 50% of users, not 50%, or 50% of devices, not some weird mixture of the two. And so with this gate and with me providing an ID, I can actually go ahead and say like, yeah, actually I will release this to 50% of users. We can actually go ahead over to diagnostics and also see sort of which users saw what experience and why from the Statsig side. This is super helpful for debugging what you were seeing with your users, as well as understanding just like, are the people I expect to passing, why are they passing, etc. I can go ahead and look at some of these and see that, yep, here's 1, 2, 3, 6. On that everyone rule, which was at 50%, they got true then and there. And then I can also see over here a different user, 1, 2, 3, 7, who failed on that same rule. That is sort of them passing, failing then and there, and getting those sort of responses back. Diagnostics also lets you do all sorts of filtering, super handy for tracking down why someone did or didn't get the experience that you expected them to. The other cool thing that you can do is you can actually copy any of these user objects, go ahead over to setup and paste them into this test gate and see sort of what you expect them to get. So I could similarly go through my user IDs and increment them. We can double check that like, hey, if this was a 6, yep, they passed. If this was a 5, they also passed, but maybe 8, I don't know if they would pass or not, and so on and so forth. As I add more, we'll find some also who fail, just to sort of the 50-50, although this one's getting pretty lucky. There we go. And yeah, that's sort of how you can start adding more information about your user to what you initialize with, making use of that in Statsig and targeting off of that, rolling out features based on that, things like that. Yeah. In our next videos, we'll be talking more about what this looks like, both from the server side as well as going sort of deeper on some of these. But yeah, stay tuned for more. Thanks.